She's going to talk to us about Trustworthy AI. Aishwarya is an AI and machine learning innovation leader at IBM Data and AI. She works cross-functionally with the product team, data science team, and sales to research AI use cases for clients by conducting discovery workshops and building assets to showcase business value of the technology. She's an advocate for open source technologies, currently a developer advocate for PyTorch Lightning, and previously a contributor to scikit-learn. She holds a postgraduate degree in data science from Columbia University. She's very focused on expanding her horizons in the machine learning research community, including her recent patent award won in 2018 for developing a reinforcement learning model for machine trading. She is an ambassador for the Women in Data Science community, originating from Stanford University. She has a huge follower base on LinkedIn and actively organizes events and conferences to inspire budding data scientists. She has been spotlighted as a LinkedIn Top Voice 2020 for data science and AI. I'm going to go ahead and bring Aishwarya up on our stage here. Hello, hello,
Hi,
and
Kate.
welcome to the DATAcated Expo. It's a really pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad. I was just like listening to Brent, and it was just amazing to, see how diverse kind of topics you have collected together for the expo.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to let you take the stage. You've got your 10
Sure.
minutes and we'll be back with questions for you. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, amazing. So I'm not sure like which time zone you guys are joining in from. So like good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to whichever time zone you're tuning in from. And today I'm like really excited to talk about trustworthy AI because this is one of the things which we have been noticing needs to be addressed in different industries. And that's what I wanted to talk about, like have a cross-industry perspective of what this means when we are looking at it from different industrial perspective, and what is a way that it can actually be integrated into enterprises. So I'm just going to skip this. Yeah. So one of the reasons why trustworthy AI became a topic of concern is because of the issues, or like because of the alarming cases that we saw was coming out of different technical technology companies, and how we saw that impact was getting hold in the society. So we've been seeing all these news snippets that you see on the screen. Like we've been hearing about these stories, and it does concern all of us, right? Being a data scientist myself, like I can totally feel, and like I do myself be scared of the ill effects of the technology that we are building. But everything, like as we say, like every coin has both two sides. This is not something that's not unaddressable. It's absolutely something that can be addressed, and it's just a means of setting up the right guidelines, making sure that the technology is being built with the right kind of processes, that it can be addressed. So when we speak about trustworthy AI, right, like this is such a broad topic that it's very difficult to explain it to somebody just with like one sentence. So a way I have figured this out is like dividing it into different pillars, and then we can address this in all our technologies that we are building. So we can distribute like the trustworthy AI into the pillars that you see on the screen. So it's right from explainability, fairness, robustness, privacy, and transparency. Let me like get into each of these pillars. Explainability, right? Like as you saw in the previous talk that Brent was giving about data storytelling, that's a part of explainability that we see here, right? Explainability comes in three sections. That's like explaining your data. That is like you have good interpretation on your data that you're using. You have a business insight into the data that you have, and then explaining the model. That's another crucial aspect that you see, that we need to explain the model. We need to understand what the model is doing. Why is it picking out certain features? Why is it selecting certain feature engineering? Why is it working on a certain set of hyperparameters? And why does it deliver a certain kind of probability for different predictions, right? So that's second section. Now, the final section around explainability is explaining the results. So, for example, let's say we are building a prediction system that's rejecting or accepting any kind of applications. It could either be like loan application or increasing your credit card limit, or it could be like submitting your resume and being accepted for any job or not. So when you see these predictions that's coming out of the models, that predictions also needs to be explained. So these explainability concept comes in different facets because it's not just the consumers who needs explanation on the final predictions that you're getting. It's also the stakeholders who are owners in the organization, who are business leaders in the organization, who need different kinds of explanation. It's also the data scientists who are building these models and they are sharing it and it's going through reusability pipelines. They also need different kinds of explainability. So the explainability pillar encompasses the three kinds of explainability. That's data explainability, model explainability, and predictive explainability. And it has to cater through different personas and have different kinds of explanations for different kinds of people involved in this entire data science pipeline. Now, the second section is fairness. So, fairness, as the word explains itself, that we need to make sure that the models that we are building does not incorporate any kinds of biases in them. So, when I say biases, this is not just the bias that the model can just inherit. It's something that could also come from the data. So we need to make sure that the data that we are feeding into the models are the real representation of the population data, which means, as an example, let's say we are collecting a data sample, which is like a small subset of data from a huge data set. We need to make sure that the bootstrap data that we have collected is actually a diverse or like a right representation of the major data set that we are using. Along with this, we also need to make sure that there is no societal implication on the data set. What I mean by that is, as an example, if we are picking out, job details or information about different roles of people who are in a technology field, there is a chance that we might find that less women are being represented in certain roles compared to men. And that's a societal bias that exists and that we are able to see in the data. And these are also crucial points that we need to address. And we need to make sure that these biases are not really reflected back onto the models that we are building. And these biases are not being produced as a part of the prediction by the model. Now, the third thing is robustness. With robustness, we want to make sure that the models or like the data analytics pipeline that we are building is free of any attacks. Now, these attacks could be either on the data, it could either be on the model where the model is sitting, or it could be on the ultimate predictions. So one of the easiest examples that I can think about, to explain robustness is with respect to adversarial attacks, right? If you input any kind of image to a image classifier model, and it ideally should be predicting the right kind of label for that, but you introduce some kind of noises into the image, which when a human eyes looks at it, it's not detectable. But when the same image with slight noise inherited into it is passed through the model, we see that the model is now predicting a completely different label with a high probability. Now that's an issue, because now what's happening is that we are targeting the model and we are exploiting the way the model is being built. Similarly, there can be attacks that could happen on the data itself. So wherever the data repository is using which the data model is being trained, that could be attacked. And similarly, any model outputs that's coming from the model could also be attacked. Now, the final output is only supposed to be visible to certain audiences, and it could be intercepted, and that system could be hacked. So that's why we wanted to make sure that with robustness, we want to make sure that all the AI pipelines that we are building is robust and is capable of preventing these kinds of attacks, or at least are able to detect these kind of attacks happening. With privacy, we of course know there's been a lot of conversation going on because different companies are involved at different levels, and very straightforward questions have been posted on these companies about data privacy. Because with data privacy, we want to make sure that the users whose data is being used needs to be private, and only certain kinds of data belonging to individuals can be accessible to industries. And that's why we want to make sure that any kind of sensitive information or personally identifiable information is not leaked to anybody in this entire process. Now, the last pillar is transparency. So, what I mean by transparency is the entire process that any organization is implementing needs to be transparent to the consumers. That is, if your data is being used, then you need to be aware of how this data is being collected. I need to be aware that my microphone is collecting data, my camera is collecting data without my notice, or like my keypad is collecting my data, etc. So the organizations need to inform the users about how their data is being collected, what is the intended purpose of the collection of this data. That is, we're going to use your keypad data for building these kind of models, or we are going to collect your audio data to feed in for your recommendation, etc. So the user need to be aware of where this data is being used, and as a part of the process, the organization need to make sure that the data is not being used for any other purposes than the initial intent that was communicated. Now, we have to talk about, like, how do we do this? Like, it's now we have distributed and, like, gone through the different pillars of trustworthy AI. Now, how do organization implement this vast guideline, or this vast concept into their enterprise? So it can very simply be divided into three sections. So one is technology, the second is people, and the third is process. By technology, what I mean is the data pipelines that we build, the efficiency of the model that we build. So anything and everything around building these technologies is what needs to be addressed, and we need to make sure that we are making sure that all these different pillars are being addressed with the technology that we are building. So anything that we build, if it has to do with the data, we need to make sure that it doesn't contain any biases. We need to make sure that the data quality is good. We need to make sure that the models that are being used are in accordance with the final output that we want from the model. We need to make sure that the data does not contain any kind of private information, or it does not contain any kind of information that could induce bias in the model. So this is from the technology perspective. Now, the second part is people. For actually implementing these things, we need the right people, right? Like, we need data officers, we need people who are coming from the ethical background, we need people who are coming from psychology background, from user experience, etc., who can come together and make sure that each of these sections in the technology are stitching together in the right fashion. So we need people who can come to the table and actually represent the right diversity in the society, and they can make sure that the technology that is being built is actually reflecting to the right needs. And the final part is process. So any kind of technology that we are building with the people needs to be connected with the process. So we need to make sure that there are right guidelines, that there are written rules and regulations which people adhere to, and there is a process in line which helps people manage all the time spent on building these models, and how they are being delivered and how they are being consumed. So the process ties people and technology together. Now, the next thing that we see is, why is it really important for the organizations? Why do organizations need to invest in building trustworthy AI systems in their enterprise? Of course, brand reputation. Whenever we see big technology companies' name coming on the news saying that their models have been causing any issues, or they have like a societal damage, it does affect the brand reputation. So that is one of the concerns that companies would have, to have a good brand reputation, to make sure that the consumers of their products or services do trust in their brand. Second is increased regulations. Eventually, companies do have to get these processes and get the right people in their organization, because regulation demands so. We have seen European Union building regulations around it. We have GDPR, we have CCPA in place, which encompasses all these. So it's increased regulation which makes the organization take hard steps on this as soon as possible. Then we have complexity of AI deployments, right? After a point when companies are experimenting, in the last decade, we have seen companies going from experimental AI to actually building AI, which are going and being used by the consumers. So as and when we have more of these AI systems built and more industries using these services, we need to make sure that all of them are working in a regulated, in a process-oriented manner. Last but not the least, of course, we want to make sure that we are taking care of the societal impacts of anything that we are building. So, as a data scientist myself, I do feel the need that I need to make sure that the kind of technology that I'm building does not have any ill impact on the society. So that's pretty much what I had for the presentation today. If you any of you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. This is my LinkedIn link. And yeah, I will be happy to answer any of your questions even right now.
Awesome. All right. I've shared your LinkedIn link again, guys. Go ahead and follow Aishwarya. She's very, very active on LinkedIn, always posts great content. Thank you so much for this great presentation. We do have plenty of questions and comments that have come in, but I want to start with my own question. When you were talking about the transparency side of trustworthy AI, a question came in my mind is, who's actually responsible for this? Is it the people or users? Is it the company that is putting out these data collection apps, or is it the government, or is it all three? I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
In my opinion, the way it should be structured is, of course, the company, because every company has its secret sauce. They would not want, like anybody, any third party to be intruding into their process. So it has to be the company. But as I mentioned, there has to be the right people who are responsible for these within the company. So
Mhm.
right now, I don't think a lot of organizations have appointed the right people. They don't have the right personas who are handling these specifically for building transparency and like governed AI systems. So that is something that needs to be incorporated in the enterprises so that they're answerable for the transparency needs.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll take a question here from David, and he's asking, as site visitors often don't read the privacy notices, how can we provide levels of opt-in, as the default will likely be to opt out of all tracking?
So we do have options of opting out. So most of the apps are internet websites that you're using do have an option to opt out, and that's what I do majority of the time. But absolutely, I agree with David that the terms and conditions that appear, they are overwhelmingly huge for anybody to read and understand what's going on. And there are a lot of applications which will not let you use them until and unless you're actually opting in to their terms and conditions. And that's a fine line which I believe a lot of research is going on how to simplify the terms and conditions or the legal obligations of what's being put in that contract or like the terms and conditions that we see, and how to make it more readable for any layman who's using it. So I'm definite that that should be something we should see in near future.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. I tend to just accept most cookies because, I'm on a site, I need to get to something, and this out pops this banner. I'm like, yes, yes,
Yeah.
take my data, give me what I need, which I do think most people are probably like that. But,
Yeah.
guys can let us know in the comments if you actually read those notices. We'll take one last question here from Kendall. She's asking if you have any suggestions for quantifying fairness. She's seen a confusion matrix spread across different groups, but would like to become familiar with other ways to check this.
So confusion matrix is something that's with the model, right? Like what I mean by fairness is looking at the data initially before building in any of the models.
Mhm.
So fairness, as an example, I can mention this that let's say I'm collecting data in which 10% of the women are represented in the data set with resumes, skills, and the right kind of jobs that they are applying to, and if they were accepted or rejected for that particular job.
Mhm.
If there is going to be 10% of the representation of women versus 90% of men, we need to make sure is that something happening because of the subsampling that we are doing from the original sample, or is that how the data it looks like in the original population data? So if it actually like represents the society in which we live in, if it has diverse information, if it has the right kind of representation, then it means that the data is fine, but the subsampling could not be correct, like the way we are subsampling the data set. If the
Mhm.
subsample is skewed, then of course we can go back to the population data and collect the right kind of distribution. And like measuring the distribution itself is like one of the best ways you can do, and see if, like the right age groups are being represented in the data, the right gender, the right race, caste, anything is being represented in that data set that we're using.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. We do have more questions coming in. If you do have time to hop over to the LinkedIn chat, would be really
Sure.
cool if you can respond to some
Absolutely.
of those. We are out of time here, however, so thank you so much, Aishwarya. I will see you online.